Mr. President, it's been said that April is the cruelest month. I think that pretty much captures how Americans feel as tax day approaches each year. This year, Americans will spend 114 days working to pay their federal, state, and local taxes. In other words, Americans may have submitted their federal tax returns or be getting ready to submit them tonight, but they're still not done working off their taxes. In fact, Americans won't start earning a dollar for themselves until April the 25th, almost one-third of the way through the year. Americans spend 6.1 billion hours every year trying to comply with the tax code. That's an average of 19 hours for every man, woman, and child in the United States, or an average of 76 hours for a family of 4. Almost half of small businesses spend more than $5,000 each year on tax compliance. That's $5,000 on top of their tax bill. Mr. President, paying taxes is never going to be on the top of Americans' list of favorite activities, but it doesn't have to be the torturous process that it's become. The tax code takes too much time to comply with. It takes too much money from hardworking Americans. Comprehensive tax reform is long overdue. Unfortunately, instead of tax reform under the Obama administration, Americans have just gotten more taxes. The President's health care law created or raised taxes to the tune of more than $1 trillion over the first decade. And several of those taxes have hit families making less than $250,000 a year, despite the President's campaign pledge not to raise taxes on families making less than $250,000. Let's take the Obamacare medical device tax. Thanks to this tax, families are now facing higher prices on life-saving medical equipment like pacemakers and insulin pumps. Obamacare taxes are also driving up prices for families on essential drugs like EpiPens and asthma medications. Other Obamacare taxes are costing American families in other ways. The Obamacare employer mandate tax is discouraging employers from expanding and hiring, which means fewer jobs and opportunities for American workers. And then there's the individual mandate tax that last year began hitting American families without government-approved insurance. For 2015, the individual mandate tax penalty is $325 per person, or 2% of household income, whichever is greater. In 2016, that tax penalty will rise to $695 per person, or 2.5% of household income, whichever is greater. But that's not all that Obamacare is bringing to tax season. This year, a full half of Americans receiving Obamacare health insurance subsidies discovered that they have to pay back some or all of their subsidies because they didn't estimate their income correctly. Ultimately, just 4% of households receiving subsidies had the correct subsidy advanced to their insurance companies. Unfortunately, the confusion and mistakes are par for the course for Obamacare. The administration apparently finds the law so confusing that it sent out incorrect Obamacare forms to more than 800,000 people. And yet the administration wants us to believe that Obamacare is somehow working. Mr. President, we need to repeal this broken law and its $1 trillion worth of taxes. And we need to reform our bloated tax code. We need to cut rates for families so that Americans can spend more of the year working for themselves and less of the year working for the federal government. And we need to cut rates for businesses, both large and small. The U.S. currently has the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world. That puts American businesses at a huge disadvantage compared to their foreign competitors, and American workers suffer the consequences: lower wages and fewer opportunities. Reforming both corporate and individual tax rates would go a long way toward making American businesses more competitive and opening new opportunities and higher-paying jobs for American workers. And of course, any tax reform measure should include reforms to the IRS. From mishandled customer service to the agency's most serious offenses, the First Amendment violations involving the deliberate targeting of groups for extra scrutiny based on their political beliefs, this agency, the IRS, is long overdue for reform. The IRS commissioner himself John Koskinen, was quoted in Monday's Washington Post as saying, and I quote, "We certainly can't afford to have taxpayer service be any worse than it is, although it's hard to imagine it being much worse than it is," end quote. That's from the IRS commissioner himself. When even the IRS commissioner admits that the agency's taxpayer services can't get much worse, that's a signal that the agency is ripe for reform. Mr. President, before I close, I'd like to take a moment to talk about what I think is a bright spot for our economy, and that's bipartisan trade promotion authority. Previous free and fair trade agreements have been a boon to the economy, expanding opportunities for American workers and giving American farmers, like many of those I represent in South Dakota, and manufacturers access to new markets for their goods. Nearly one of these trade agreements was negotiated, I should say nearly every one of these trade agreements was negotiated and enacted using trade promotion authority. The idea behind trade promotion authority is very simple. Congress sets negotiating priorities for the administration and requires the administration to consult with Congress during that negotiating process. In return, Congress promises a simple up or down vote on the legislation instead of a lengthy amendment process that could leave the final agreement looking nothing like what was negotiated. That up or down vote, Mr. President, is the key. That's what gives our trading partners the confidence to put their best offers on the table, which allows for a successful conclusion of negotiations. Trade Promotion Authority expired in 2007, and Republicans have been trying to get it reauthorized ever since. Currently, the administration is negotiating two key trade agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the U.S.-EU trade agreement, that are unlikely to be concluded in the near future unless Trade Promotion Authority is finally renewed. These agreements will expand opportunities for American workers and open new markets for American goods. A bipartisan reauthorization of Trade Promotion Authority will help bring these agreements to a speedy conclusion. And Mr. President, that will be good news for American workers and American businesses. The challenges facing our nation are best solved when members of both parties come together to find solutions for the American people. And I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues on Trade Promotion Authority and other issues that will grow our economy, create better paying jobs for American workers, and increase the take-home pay of middle-income families in this country. Mr. President, I yield the floor.